Question number 11 on the reading portion of College Board's Test 4. Which choice best summarizes the first paragraph of the passage, lines 1 to 35? So let's remember what the first paragraph was about and see if we can summarize it in a few words or sentence. So he says in the beginning, we are not witnessing the abandonment of the suburbs or a movement of millions of people back to the city. So we talk about this very complex situation on how we start with our thesis, or maybe our central conclusion. We are not witnessing the abandonment of the suburb. The 2010 census certainly did not turn up evidence of a middle-class stampede to the nation's cities. So we have mixed news. Some of cities gained population, some lost, and some stayed the same. The cities that showed gains, but when it comes to measuring, so now we have this however. So we have a lot of confusing stuff in the beginning. We say we're not witnessing the abandonment from the suburbs. Let's talk about some census numbers. But when it comes to measuring demographic inversion, raw census numbers are an ineffective blunt instrument. When we try to understand the flow of different people, it's no longer easy to understand. A closer look, now we're going to talk about the hard numbers of demographic inversion with respect to certain populations, African Americans, immigrant communities, where they're settling, where they're leaving. And we talk about central city areas, then finally gain rich people. And finally, there's no reason to believe that this trend of rich people moving into the city while other groups move out of the city is not going to stay the same. So I think this paints a very, it's not a direct picture. We're not saying a conclusion, and that's what this whole piece is really about. Because he says we are not witnessing the abandonment of the suburbs or movement of millions of people back to the city. Okay, so what are we witnessing? And now he goes on to talk about the nuanced understanding of how this demographic inversion is playing out, on how we can measure it in certain ways or other ways, but some of them are not good, some of them don't measure what we want to measure, and as a result, the picture is not as clear as we might expect. That's my takeaway from the first paragraph. So if you take a look, which choice best summarizes the first paragraph of the passage, line 1 to 35? The 2010 census demonstrated a sizable growth in the number of middle-class families moving into inner cities. Okay, that's just not true. If anything, we know that middle-class families are not moving into cities. Rich people, they found that affluent residences were moving to central cities. I don't even think they talk about middle-class families for that matter at all here. And even though certain cities gained population, certain ones lost population, certain ones stay the same, we don't know what types of people move there other than the affluent in line 20. So middle-class families moving in inner city, we don't know that. That's just like not true. This is where these types of passages can be very tricky, because it's very easy to get confused about what was said, and it's very easy for them to put words in your mouth, especially when you don't have a firm grasp of what was actually stated. A is a good example of that, where you're like, I don't remember what happened, and you're like, I don't know, maybe. What about B? Does the first paragraph say the 2010 census is not a reliable instrument for measuring population trends in American cities? Maybe, maybe not. Because the 2010 census is not a reliable instrument for measuring population trends. Because he does say that. He does say, but when it comes to measuring demographic inversion, lines 12, raw census numbers are ineffective blunt instrument. So even though we can use the census and we can use just basic population numbers in order to understand a situation in terms of is the city growing or shrinking, it doesn't help us understand the finer grain to what's happening, the flow of people and the types of people that are moving. I'll leave it. I don't know if it's, the problem that bothers me here is reliable. It's not a reliable instrument. It's like, that means that you can't rely on it, or somehow it might be flawed. And I can understand how you can sense, oh, it's a flawed measure. But on the other hand, I don't consider it to be unreliable in that it's completely meaningless. I have pros and cons for this answer choice, but let's leave it, because I think it's at least closer to the truth than A was. What about C? Population growth and demographic inversion are distinct phenomenon, and demographic inversion is evident in many American cities. Maybe. Let's leave that too, because I like how we're talking about population growth, which is what was the census numbers we're talking about. I like how demographic inversion is talked about, in that they say raw census numbers are ineffective blunt instruments, and we need to better understand demographic events of the past decade in order to understand the growth and decay of cities. Maybe. D, population growth in American cities has been increasing since roughly 2000, while suburban populations have decreased. What? We don't know suburban populations have decreased. If anything, you can argue that suburban populations have increased because of so many people moving to the suburbs in Chicago, so many immigrant communities moving into suburbs. They never once talk about population growth in American cities have been increasing. So I'm not liking D. So now let's take a look B and C. This is the back and forth that we're going to have to deal with. So B says the 2010 census is not a reliable instrument for measuring population trends. I'm going to have to say I'm not a fan of this. I'm coming down hard on it now for some reason. At first I gave it the benefit of the doubt, and now I'm kind of a little bit skeptical. The 2010 census is not a reliable instrument for measuring population trends. I think that they just say it's not necessarily true that the census is not a reliable instrument to measure population trends. It's just it's just it's a blunt instrument because it just tells us numbers of people. It doesn't tell us exactly how people are moving. So while it is true that it's not a good measure to understand what the author is looking to understand, demographic inversion, can we say that it's not a reliable instrument for measuring population trends at all? I think population trends just mean, is it going up or down? And the author never says that it's bad at measuring population trends, because if anything, it's very good. It's very good at measuring whether or not people move, there's X amount of people in a city, or how many more people in a city from year over year, or how many people have left the city. That is good. But what types of inversion or how the flow is happening is a little bit more complex. So I'm starting to sour on B a little bit. This is a very hard question, actually, because B comes right off the heels of A, which is, I think, a bad answer. So B automatically looks a lot better than it really ought to. And I certainly not fell for it, but I kept an open mind about that by also accepting that. What about C? Population growth and demographic inversion are distinct phenomenon. I kind of like this because he's saying in the piece, population growth, measuring how many people are in a city, is different than determining how those people are moving. What types of people are moving? What socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnicities are these people moving, in what way? So I like that population growth and demographic inversion are distinct. They're different. We can't use one for the other. And this guy does say that. We can't use numbers on the census of just sheer how many people are in a city in order to determine demographic inversion, and vice versa. Population growth and demographic inversion are distinct, and demographic inversion is evident in many American cities. Maybe, because what do we find out? In Chicago, a closer look at the results show that the most powerful demographic events of the past decade, or demographic inversion, occurred in Chicago, African Americans moving out, and immigrant groups in suburbs, line 18. One many miles downtown. And finally, what do we find out? Affluent residences are moving back into the cities. So this is the demographic inversion I think that the piece was talking about. This was a very hard question. But I think after weighing all the pros and cons and looking at all sides of this, we can say that C is going to be the answer for this. It's irrefutable. It's hard. You can't prove it wrong that population growth and demographic inversion are a distinct phenomenon from paragraph 1, because he does say that. He says on how the census numbers are not good to measure demographic inversion. So they're different. They're distinct. You use them for different reasons. And demographic inversion is evident in many American cities. That is true too, because we talk about all the different types of cities in America and how the people within them are moving. People with money are moving into cities, when, if we recall from at the end, people with money used to move out of cities. And people who are immigrants who used to move into cities are now moving in the suburbs and being in the suburbs from day one. These are the demographic inversion trends that the author is trying to get across. We're not... and I think also it's just a matter of perspective too, why B is another mark against B, is that lines 1 to 35, sometimes you have to ask yourself this. This is another good way of thinking about this. These types of questions. When they ask for very big pieces of information, don't nitpick one tiny little thing that they said. And I think that's something that someone could fall prey to, where you might argue, well, they did talk about how the census numbers are not that good. It's like, well, they didn't really, even if they did say that, and they're not saying it in this sense of measuring population trends, that it's not a reliable instrument measuring population trends, even if you just assume, okay, let's assume for now that that's true. Is that the main takeaway from this huge paragraph? No. They only said that once. They mentioned it like once. And you don't want to have an answer that is only mentioned in one specific part of the piece to generalize for a very big part of the passage. So that's another big strike against B, that B is very specific, and it's trying to get you to remember one specific thing that they said rather than zoom out and think generally what was said. And I find that those questions are very hard when they pit two answers against each other like that. One of them is very comfortable for you to pick because you remember it specifically in the piece, but the other one is a little bit more abstract, a little bit more, it requires a little more intuition, a little bit more thought, but nonetheless it's true because it's right more times than the other answer is. The one that's broader and the one that has a more overarching summary of the paragraph is going to be the answer, and that's exactly what C is doing. Very hard question. The answer number 11 is going to be C.